Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
And here we are with the last of our Corman tributes. I chose 1990's Frankenstein Unbound. And the reason I chose this movie, it was the last movie that Roger Corman directed. Now, of course, we've been doing this tribute series because he died at the age of 98 this year. And what Corman had been doing from 1971 was just producing. You know, he was mostly a producer. He did direct 56, 57 films.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty significant. He produced hundreds. And so at that point in 1971, I think he was just getting a little frustrated as a director. He said, directing's kind of hard. Producing I can do in my sleep. And so he really focused on that. But he came out of directing retirement to do this film. And I believe it was at the urging of an editor in the business named Jay Cassidy, I think. I don't know. You know, it's actually, I had a hard time finding too much information about the background of this production.
Me too.
It's like no interviews really with people about it. I couldn't find any interviews with Roger Corman where he mentions it. It just kind of came and went, which is a bit of a surprise considering the people in it. I mean,
I know.
The cast is all-star. It's John Hurt, Raul Julia, Bridget Fonda, Jason Patric is in there. This guy, Nick Brimble, I mean, that might not be a name you know, but you have seen him in so many things. He is a working actor to this day on television and movies and was at the time he did this. So yeah, there's so many big names in this movie, and the movie has pretty good production value for a Corman film. Decent script, I think. Decent idea. The script is based on a 1973 novel, I believe, by the same name. And of course, it's a play off of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The alternate title for that is Prometheus Unbound.
Well, the alternate title is Or the Modern Prometheus, which she borrowed from, I think, her husband. It was either her husband or Byron who had written something called Prometheus Unbound.
So it's like a poem, right? Yeah, I think it was her husband. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, get ready for nerdy lit shit. It's coming.
I was expecting it from this movie. Now, before I even sat down to watch it, and I had not seen it before, I texted you, or you texted me, and you said, I love this movie. And I think that wasn't facetious. I'm not sure.
No, it wasn't. And
did you love this movie?
Yeah, and I texted you that like halfway through, and I was like, well, I'm going to wait to send it. I'm going to wait to send it until it's over, just so that I don't regret sending it. And I hesitated to send it to you at all, because sometimes I don't want to tip you off as to whether or not I liked something, but I just couldn't hold back. For a variety of reasons, this is my favorite of the four that we watched.
Oh, yeah.
And I can believe I haven't seen it because I don't think anybody knows about it. I mean, I was vaguely aware of its existence. The box art I was always intrigued by because it's very Frankenstein-y in that it's, you know, human pieces stitched together, but it's tied up on the eyes, and the eyeballs, like eyeballs of different colors, are all stitched together, and it really pops with color. And like,
it's cool.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on the shelves, I think.
Yeah, I did.
But for whatever reason, I wasn't interested, and I never hear anybody talk about it, and I haven't read anything that I can recall about it, and it's really, it's hard to find. It's up in full on YouTube in good quality. That's where I watched it, and the quality was great.
Yeah, like free YouTube, like just somebody uploaded it, and they haven't been ordered to take it down.
And it's been there. I checked. It's been there for years. So
yeah,
hopefully it won't get taken down, because you should watch it. If you haven't seen it, it's great.
You know, of course, it reminded me a lot of Gothic, you know, and I think I appreciated this movie a lot more having seen Gothic. Months ago we did Gothic, maybe last year.
Yeah, last fall.
Yeah, and that movie was a real trippy film that took us to that summer in Switzerland where Lord Byron and Mary Shelley and her husband were all getting high and batting about story ideas, and that is widely known as the birthplace for the idea, this challenge to Mary Shelley, like, you write something, you know, you write a scary story.
Well, it was a contest.
Yeah, between them all.
They all wrote.
Yeah, but I mean, like, obviously, like, we don't remember anybody
But that was the
else's.
challenge, right?
Yeah.
Right, a scary story.
Yeah.
Well, one of them was the vampire with a Y, which
Inspired.
inspired Dracula, I think. Gosh,
Yeah.
I don't know. Go back and listen to that episode.
We talk all about
we
it.
talk about it
And we
a
gushed
lot.
over that movie, and we got really deep into the history as well of these people and this time. And so what was really cool is this is a time travel movie, and it takes us back to that year, 1817? And so I found it immediately intriguing because it mixes a little bit of history with a little bit of fantasy and a little bit of time travel, and that's always kind of a fun mix and typical Roger Corman fare, right? Little horror, a little sci-fi, spectacle.
But that is, and that's certainly a part of it. But I would say that this is very atypical of the Corman that I've seen because the sci-fi stuff is certainly important, but almost secondary to the literary and historical drama that is unfolding before you.
Correct.
The reason that I loved this movie was because I knew it had something to do with Frankenstein and I knew it had something to do with the future. So I just thought, well, it'll be Frankenstein in the future. That's fine. I'm down for that. That's not what it is at all.
No.
It's a time travel movie that starts in 2031 where this guy, his name's Buchanan, played by John Hurt, whose name you already mentioned, famous. I know him from the film adaptation of 1984 because I showed the trailer for it in my class. But he's been around doing stuff forever.
The most basic horror fan, he's the guy who gets the chest burster in Alien.
Yes, of course.
But so many other things he's been in. Just a very respectable British actor, I think.
It's also structured like Frankenstein in that it starts in the present for the characters and then it flashes back. So, and it's the exact same thing as in Frankenstein. This guy is just walking through winter tundra and he starts telling his story. It's like, I'll start from when the time slips were just beginning. And I was like, what?
Yep.
And I was already sold because it was already opening just like Frankenstein. And I'm like, is this going to be a good adaptation? And as it turns out, it is. Before getting into too much of the detail of the plot, what I was so impressed by was I desperately want to read this novel now.
Yeah,
because
me
I can
too.
only imagine that the novel might be even smarter than the movie, and I think the movie is smart. It's just such a clever concept to say, let's take a piece of literature that we already have that everybody's familiar with, and we can also place that in the historical context of which it was written, because that's also interesting. So we'll kind of combine those two things. And then we'll have a time traveler from 2031 come back and be immersed in it.
Yeah.
But we're going to completely and totally respect the source material. This is one of the most faithful adaptations of Frankenstein I've seen. I was just giddy going through it. Like, everything about the plot and characters of the story, pretty much until the very, very end, is straight out of the book. And as you already mentioned, you know, all the stuff that's going on with Byron and Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, all of that is very true to history. So I just think that's such a smart thing to be able to take a foundation that's already there, insert something in it, and make something new. I've never read the book or seen the movie, so I'm only kind of speculating. But when I was watching this, I was thinking, I wonder if this is kind of like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, where
Oh, yeah.
it is Pride and Prejudice. There just also happen to be zombies.
Well, what I liked about it is, well, first of all, the conceit is that Mary Shelley is writing about her neighbor. So the Frankenstein story is happening in parallel with Shelley and her friends and their day-to-day drama that revolves around that. And so she's inspired by those events to write her book, which hasn't been written yet. But what I really liked about it was that John Hurt is himself a mad scientist.
Right.
And so in sort of being sent back to be witness to Frankenstein that he's totally familiar with because, you know, he's from 2031. He sees himself reflected back. And so that is a major theme, I think, of the movie as well that I don't think is really treated as deeply as it could be treated, quite frankly.
I thought it was pretty evident.
I mean, it was evident, but I felt like John Hurt as Buchanan was a little aloof. He pretty much operated in the past as though he was invincible and didn't also seem worried about manipulating the past because He gets deeply involved with the characters. He shows Mary Shelley a copy of her own book, that she hasn't even written yet. And so I guess we're to believe that because he's able to do this, I mean, this is all time travel stuff, right? Like these paradoxes and whatnot.
The movie is not concerned with paradoxes.
It's not.
There are a lot of things that the movie is not concerned with, and I was just ready to roll with that. I was ready to roll with the fact that there are so many things
that this guy's just driving his futuristic car
just driving
all around
his
the countryside.
car around. Like he and Bridget Fonda go on a scenic drive in the mountains, and I'm like, what road is he driving on?
Right?
It's not even like an all-terrain vehicle or anything. It's like a sports car, and it's ridiculous. And I saw it, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I'm like, yes, Craig, it is ridiculous. Look at the car they are driving in. It is ridiculous. It's fun. Just enjoy it. And that was the Corman part of it that I loved. And I have no idea, how all of the technology and the future stuff is handed in the novel. But all of the stuff in the beginning where they're in the future and they're in like these labs with all these computers and stuff.
Lasers and things, yeah.
It was so cheap in the best way.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure he had a budget for this movie. I'm sure he had probably a really big budget, I would guess. I mean, here's this legend coming out of retirement. Not out of retirement necessarily, but he just hadn't directed in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got all these stars. To be fair, some of them earlier in their careers, but nonetheless, not all of them. Some of them established already. I can only imagine he had a budget. And yet, those set pieces where it's like, a room just full of big panels of flashing lights, like bleep, bloop, bloop, bleep, bleep,
mm-hmm.
bloop, bloop. Like
old school computer.
And they're wearing like metallic spacesuits, and even when he goes outside of his house and like the kids are in these ridiculous like futuristic outfits, it was so cheesy in exactly the way that I wanted it to be cheesy.
Yeah.
It was such a great, I wouldn't even call it a throwback. This is his style.
Yeah.
But it was so him that I was so on board.
I thought it provided a good parallel, counterpoint, whatever you want to call it, to later in the movie where we see Frankenstein's lab in all of its classic cheesy monster lab glory, That is classic and fun and cheesy in its own way with, what do you call them, Jacob's Ladder electrical pieces and big bubbling pots of red liquid that have smoke coming out of them for no apparent reason.
That comes almost directly from like the Karloff Frankenstein films,
Exactly.
Right? So I like how it's paying homage to both. And like when that happened, of course, that's the climax, basically. When that happened and I saw that set piece and it almost looks exactly like the set piece from those old black and white, it's alive movies. I was so stoked. Oh, dude.
Yeah.
I don't know how you want to approach this because I could just gush all day. I could gush about a lot of things.
Well, I think in retrospect, too, having a lot of Frankenstein movies to choose from and a lot of background, and we approach this in sort of a film criticism, historical context. Like, we probably see this movie through different lens than the audience saw it in 1990. It did not do well. People thought it was kind of bad and silly. But I think that what we're talking about is there are these sort of silly elements, but they really work thematically. That's an artistic choice. Maybe it wasn't interpreted that way back then, but I'm willing to go with that, especially because they're drawing these parallels. This guy, Buchanan, is a scientist who's working on a weapon. Again, it's the naive scientist who thinks he's going to save the world while really he's doing this horrible thing. He thinks he's going to create this weapon that's going to be so powerful it's going to end all wars. And since he's been testing it, suddenly time rifts have been opening up and bad things have been going on. And a time rift indeed opens up right there in front of him. And that's what sucks him in his car. Thank God he had his car, else I don't know how he would have gotten around.
Yeah, Bruce Campbell style. Right.
Yeah. Into 1817. And like I said, like when I say he's kind of aloof, like once he kind of realizes where he is and what's going on, he does have a sort of detached interest in it all. But then he starts to get involved. I guess a part of the novel. Now, I have to admit, I have not read the novel. I'm sure you have. But you have. You talked about it.
I taught it last fall for the first time. That's why we did Gothic.
A big part of the novel, apparently a part of the novel that's not in most of the film adaptations, is this trial of a woman for the murder of Victor Frankenstein's younger brother. And so John Hurt sees what's going on and knows this woman's innocent. He knows that there must have been a monster involved because he's read the book.
Right. He's read the book. And all of this is so true. Like, the character names are true. The only thing that's not true is that Mary Shelley herself was not in the gallery. Like,
right.
As you already said, the movie posits that she's writing this story as it unfolds. Now, how she knows, and maybe she doesn't, I don't know, maybe she would figure it out later, but how she knows that there's a monster and it wasn't really Justine. Justine is the girl who's on trial, who's played by Roger Corman's daughter. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's a tiny part, but it's entirely true to the book. This girl was a very, very dear family friend. And she did not kill the younger brother. Frankenstein did. Excuse me, I'll probably make that mistake again. Yeah. The monster did, because Frankenstein made him, brought him to life, and then was like, you're hideous, get out. And did nothing to help him or aid him or anything or assist him. And he's had to go off and live in the world and be terribly mistreated because he's ugly and disgusting. And then he just comes back to Frankenstein to beg him, look, I know I'm an abomination, whatever, just make me a companion and I'll leave you alone and you'll never hear from me again. Mm-hmm. And then it's all about Frankenstein's moral dilemma, like, does he make another one or whatever? But the monster's leverage is that he can keep coming after Frankenstein's family. Mm-hmm. And that's what he does. I think he kills the dad first, maybe, and then he kills the little brother, and Justine gets blamed for it and does get hung in the book, just like she does in the movie. You get my drift.
Yeah.
It's very close. So he's an outside observer as a reader, but now in this world, he's experiencing this narrative that he already is familiar with.
It's so funny because he goes to this trial, he sits down right next to Mary Shelley, strikes up a conversation and makes acquaintance with her.
Forgive me, Miss Godwin. The young girl over there, is she the one on trial?
Yes. She's accused of killing William Frankenstein, who was 6. She lacks the physical strength necessary to commit the crime as described, so of course she's accused of witchcraft. It is a travesty.
Yes, but excellent material for a book, I suppose.
And then during the hanging, which is a pretty cool scene, you know, it's this old-fashioned, classic medieval style hanging in the middle of the town square with loads of people. He runs up and grabs an axe from somebody and whacks someone in the stomach and runs up on the stage and pulls the noose off from her head and is like, she must go free. She must go free. And I'm like, is this going to work? Of course it doesn't. They just pull the trap and he falls down under the stage and then he gets beat up. And she gets hung anyway, which I thought was actually kind of funny. How anticlimactic that ended up being. This movie's filled with a bit of dark humor. Then just events continue to unfold despite the fact that he's in the midst of them and he's interfering with them.
Well, at this point, he knows, because he's read Frankenstein, that Mary Shelley knows what's going on. So he needs to go find her while she's having this bacchanalian weekend, you know, this sex and drug-fueled weekend with her boyfriend and Lord Byron, which is super sexy in that other movie that we watched.
Yeah. So. Go check that one out for more details.
So he goes there and interrupts, and he meets Lord Byron first. And Lord Byron is played by Jason Patric, who, this is 1990, so this has to be just a few years after Lost Boys, right?
Yeah, I think it was just 3 or 4 years after.
Young and stunningly gorgeous, and plays Byron so well.
Yeah.
Like, I have no idea what he was going for in 1990, but from a 2020 lens, he seems very kind of sexually fluid. Like, yeah. Like you can't really get a read on him. Like, but he's mysterious and super hot with his piercing blue eyes. There's him. And then Mary Shelley, she was Mary Godwin at this point. She and Shelley weren't married yet. But she's played by Bridget Fonda, who, this has to be an early role for her. Like, yeah. She has to be a baby in this, right?
This is like a year or two before Single White Female, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because she's young and gorgeous. She's great. I mean, she doesn't have a lot to do. Actually, I'm not going to criticize it because I really don't have any criticisms of this movie, but I feel like her portrayal of Mary Shelley could have been more dynamic because at 19 years old, she was such an intellectual and such a, you know, an artist, and she's just kind of a demure kind of.
She just kind of comes across as a demure, introspective, like she's just sitting and processing everything around her, but not saying too much. And then what she does say, is very poetic in a lot of cases.
It is, but what I will say about her and all of her work that I've seen, she is so expressive in her face. Like her face just tells a whole story. And God, I'm such a huge fan of hers. But anyway, so I don't know, where do we leave off? Oh, he has to go find her. So he goes there and he's introduced to them. And he's also introduced to Percy Shelley, who is played by David Hutchings. Is that his name?
Michael Hutchins.
Michael
NXS.
Hutchins, the lead singer of NXS. And I had to look him up. And I read, oh, he was the lead singer of NXS. And I was like, I remember NXS. They were really cool. And then I read more about him. And his story is so sad. Did you read about any of that?
No, I did not. He died young, I know that.
NXS was a big hit for a second, and then, the later stuff that came out just in a couple of years wasn't really doing well, and so he wanted to move into film. And the first movie he did was aimed at a teenage audience, but unfortunately got an R rating, so it didn't do well at all. And then this was his second thing, and he thought it was going to be like his big breakout, but he's only in it for like a minute.
Yeah, sadly.
And then when nothing was happening, he took his own life. So young and so talented, and I remember his music. I mean, that was a big part of the soundtrack of
for childhood.
The late 80s,
it's
early
true.
90s, yeah.
Yeah, they were big.
Anyway, but so he goes there. I don't even know. Basically, he talks to them and nothing comes of it because he's like, that Justine isn't guilty. And she's like, yeah, I know, but I don't have any proof. So,
yeah.
So he leaves, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is this the point? Because I'm sorry, I didn't take any notes on this. Is this the point where he meets up with Shelley and they have their little drive? Or is that a little later?
I think it's a little bit later. What we haven't mentioned yet is that he's also run into Victor Frankenstein
yes,
several times too.
Played by Raul Julia in the classic Victor Frankenstein mold. Dark, tortured, aggressive, mad scientist man.
I love Raul Julia. I love Raul Julia.
Another guy who died too young.
He has such a presence. Yeah. He died of terrible stomach cancer immediately after filming Street Fighter.
Yeah,
I want to say.
I think
that was his last movie. I always think of him as Gomez Addams, and I think that he was an amazing Gomez Addams, but he just has this amazing charisma. He reminds me a lot of Tim Curry.
Yes.
He almost even I feel like Tim Curry could have done this. Tim Curry could have done this role too, but Raul Julia is great in it. I mean, he's arrogant and
well, he has that dark sexiness about him too, that Tim Curry wouldn't really have brought to
mystery.
That kind of classic sexy leading.
I don't remember how everything goes down, but it's right. I guess it's right after Mary Shelley says she can't do anything. He goes back and tries to interrupt Justine's hanging, is unsuccessful, and then at some point he follows Frankenstein to like a creek and the monster is there.
Yeah.
So he sees the monster too.
Mm-hmm.
We should talk about the monster.
I love this monster, actually.
I do too.
I thought that the makeup design was great. Obviously, everyone is challenged when they do a Frankenstein story to make it as little like the Universal monster design as possible, because that's copyrighted and you can get in trouble. So no more flat heads, no bolts coming out of the side of the neck. You got to be careful with your stitching and how boxy he is or whatnot. But obviously Frankenstein's monster is stitched together with parts of corpses. And some movies go really all out with that. This movie, I felt, almost took a more medical take on it. The monster's a little off because I think it's like he's almost been bulked up with some additional stuff. You see his neck is about as wide as his head is. It's really, really thick. And where we would have these, we have these big arteries in our neck. His are like tubes. 2 or 4 big, prominent arterial tubes that are under his skin, but make up the bulk of his neck coming into his head. And then his face is almost as though a face has been stretched over, an underlying skeleton. It feels like it's got a little more stuff in it than your average human head. It's just a little wider. And of course it does, because it's got to accommodate whatever electrical stuff he's got in there. Instead of having these bolts coming out of its neck, he has these flat metal protruding contact points from his forehead. And it just gives it a real good look. And then overall, he's just big.
Huge.
He's nasty looking. The eyes are great too, because they're just like the poster. It's an eye where each eye has been stitched up with other eyes, so the pupils several different colors, and he just makes them look creepy. I don't know how practical that is. I don't know why Frankenstein would need to stitch up like 5 different eyes to make one, but at least it gives a good look, right?
Yeah, it looks great.
So it's very unique, and it looked great, and it doesn't look like a guy in a suit, you know? It looks like a monstrous Frankenstein like I want to see. And he's big, and he's bulky, and he's strong, and he's played by Nick Brimble, like I said before, who has been in a lot of movies. He was Little John in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. You remember that movie? The Kevin Costner one.
I remember the movie. I don't remember him, no.
He has such a role in that. But this guy's been acting forever. He's got 145 credits. He's in a TV series right now called Grantchester. And he's one of these people who's done 2 to 3 to 4 movies a year, you know, ever since he started. And I think he does a great job in this role.
Well, I liked the look of it because you look at it and it's obviously Frankenstein, but it's a different take on Frankenstein. The general idea is there. It's all the parts put together, but especially the stretched back face just makes it different enough. Now, I don't know that I would go so far as to say that it looks amazing. Like, it's all clearly very prosthetic, and even his face is pretty plastic looking. He definitely has articulation in his eyes and in his mouth, but, you know, all that stuff with the stretched face is obviously prosthetic. What else would it be? But, I mean, it doesn't look amazing, but that's, again, I find that charming.
Yeah.
I want it to show its seams a little bit, because that's Corman to me. And you had mentioned earlier, and I'm sorry to ramble, but you had mentioned earlier that it didn't it didn't make a lot of money. I can completely understand how this would not resonate with a general audience.
Right.
Because they don't know what they're getting into. And that's not to be snobby, and that's not to condescend to anybody. It's just, I don't know how to put it. Like, you and I and anybody else who would be into Corman or whatever would know what his style was. So it wouldn't be a surprise to us. If it looks cheap, we understand why that is. I don't know. You understand what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. I mean, also, I think just the movie itself, of course it's a horror movie, but it's not straight out. There's so much drama. There's so much historical kind of stuff in it. Like you said, it's like Pride and Prejudice with zombies in a way, you know, and so the movie doesn't dwell on, it's not just Frankenstein's monster hulking around and killing people and everybody running away from it. And so when you get into a movie like modern day Frankenstein Unbound, whatever, you're probably, as a general audience, expecting to see something a little more on those lines. When it's Mary Shelley and Buchanan taking a drive, having sex. I think they have sex, right?
Pretty sure. It's implied. That's another thing that I can't believe about this movie. I guess I can. It's rated R, but aside from some gore effects, which I don't know. Do you think this would get an R today?
No,
I mean, the gore effects are pretty graphic, but it's not like they look real.
It'd be PG-13.
It looks like movie magic.
Yeah, it's not dwelled upon. I honestly don't understand why this is rated R. I think it's a 1990s R. It's got to be.
I was really thinking, like, when I got halfway through and I was so into it, I was like, can I show this to my kids?
Oh, yeah, your high school kids. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I looked and I'm like, it's rated R. And then I went to I never, ever do this. This may actually be the very first time I've done it. I went to that, like, parents guide on IMDb.
Yeah.
Where it breaks everything down, and there's nothing. There's, like, no swearing. There's certainly not any F words.
Nudity.
There's no nudity at all.
So weird for a Corman movie, actually.
There's implied sex, and by implied, it's like they kiss, and then it cuts away, and then it cuts back to the morning, and she has her top off under a blanket. Like, okay.
Right.
It's not like that's scandalous at all. And yes, there are some gory effects, but I'm thinking about it, I'm like, this is nothing that my 17-year-old kids haven't seen. This is tame compared to the things that they have seen. I think I could show it, and I think that I might.
Well, there you go. I mean, why not? Again, I just think that the crowd going to see this was probably looking for a action-packed Frankenstein movie and was a little jarred by the long segments of what I thought was very interesting and very fun literary sort of drama.
What year did Bram Stoker's Dracula come out?
The Coppola movie. It's got to have been around the same time because I imagine this came out as a response to it.
That's what I'm thinking too. And if people went looking for that, I could see why they would be disappointed.
Okay, oddly enough, as was kind of common with Corman stuff, Bram Stoker's Dracula came out 2 years after this. So this predates Dracula by 2 years. This isn't the first time this has happened with Corman. You know Carnosaur, right?
Yep.
I don't know if you've seen it, but
No.
you know of it.
Yes.
Do you know that Carnosaur predates Jurassic Park? That was they were in production about the same time. And I think Carnosaur came out first. So, yeah, this is another case where almost like it seems like maybe they had a little bit of the pulse of where things were going just before they made it big with a bigger budget movie.
Sure.
With the Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. What other movies like that all came out around this time? These updates of the classic monsters.
That's, oh gosh, I don't know. I didn't watch the trailer. I don't know how this movie was advertised. Maybe people were just going in and I don't know what people were expecting. Who knows?
But unlike Bram Stoker's Dracula has a lot of salacious stuff in it. You know, it starts off, it's super atmospheric. It's got sex. It's got nudity. It's got hints of vampires and then vampires and monsters and creatures throughout. Even though, you know, it has pretensions to be this literary kind of movie, it really is a spectacle. This movie is not. It has its moments, but it's nothing like that.
This movie is a spectacle in a different kind of way.
That's what I mean.
I don't know. But it is. I mean, it's bigger than most of the stuff that he does. Now, to be fair, like the 1870s sets, they look like sets. I mean, if you told me right now that Army of Darkness was filmed on those same sets, I wouldn't be surprised. That's kind of what it looks like. And the costumes don't look like... This is not going to be nominated for any awards for costuming.
Yeah, Shelley's dress is kind of sad,
very
actually.
Simple.
But... Maybe it's historically accurate, though. I don't know.
The townspeople, it almost feels like, you know, they
almost feel medieval. They don't feel 1817, do they?
That's absolutely true. I was just going to say, I mean, they just got their costumes off the back lot. I don't want to say a lot of care wasn't put into it because I know that that's not true. I know that Corman was very concerned about what things looked like in frame, and he wanted them to look interesting and good. So I don't want to say that no care was put into it. It
just has a cheapness to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So after the kid is killed and Justine is hung, then Buchanan tries to reason with Frankenstein and be like, you just have to tell the truth. You have to tell the truth. And Frankenstein's like, okay, here, I'll give you this sealed letter. Deliver it to my wife. And he delivers it to the wife. And he thought it was going to be like, go to the magistrate and tell them Justine is innocent, but it's not. It's just telling her to get out of there. So in other words, he's not going to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the monster has already threatened to kill Elizabeth if Elizabeth is Frankenstein's, if Frankenstein does not make a mate for him. And I think at this point, Frankenstein has said, I'm not going to do it. Now, he waffles back and forth in the book. At some point, he tells the monster he's going to do it. And then he says he's not going to do it. And then it doesn't happen the same way. Elizabeth is killed in her room in the novel. But in this, the monster chases Elizabeth through the forest.
It's pretty exciting.
Again, I couldn't find a lot about this, but she's, you know, in a horses and carriage, and he's chasing behind, and it's kind of an action piece.
Yeah.
And it looks good. I really enjoyed it.
I like the way the monster was moving. Like when he was running after it, he had this very odd kind of stilted gait, but fast. It was very menacing. And he gets up and gets up and he gets up, and then you can see he's grabbed onto the back, and then when she turns around, he's gone. And he's there in the front, you know, and just stops the horse's Superman style with his hands and rips her chest open. Oh, my God.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it was a bit gory, actually. I could see that might warrant something close to an R.
It is. I get it. Yeah, she's dead. She's dead.
And so that's the thing that I think finally convinces Frankenstein he's going to do it, because he has an interest in resurrecting Elizabeth. And that's more his selfishness than his hope to help out Frankenstein's monster. And I think that tracks with the book, right?
Well, the townspeople show up and they are going to like lynch Buchanan for the murder of Elizabeth.
Oh, that's
but
right.
The monster goes on a rampage and kills a bunch of them.
So now they know about it.
I'm not confused by this. I just think it's a little loose. I guess that Frankenstein does have control over the monster because he's the only one that can give him a mate. It just seems like the monster just killed his fiancée, and now it seems like the monster is Frankenstein's lapdog. Like,
right.
He'll do whatever he says. And so he kills all these people to save Buchanan because Buchanan is from the future and he has a futuristic car, and they can use the car to harness electricity?
Oh my God, it's so Back to the Future, right? He's gonna...
We missed the first one in the very, very beginning when Buchanan first gets to the ancient past. He drives his car and he hides it, exactly like Marty McFly.
Yeah, which is so funny because it lasts all of like a minute before he takes it out and he's just joyriding through the countryside. Doesn't care who sees him, doesn't give a shit.
But then Back to the Future comes back here.
You want to know what else is kind of funny? Small tangent is this movie takes place in 2031, which is always amusing to see these movies that take place in the future when now the future is either here or really, really close. Mm-hmm. The way he's talking to his car and asking his car for information, and his car is kind of sentient here. In 1990, I would have watched this and been like, oh, this is that cheesy, computers are never going to be like this. And here we are with AI in 2024 that is basically exactly like this.
Is Alexa quippy? Is Siri quippy?
Can be.
That's funny.
And ChatGPT, you can ask it all these things.
Reference Mary Shelley. Born Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin.
Mary Shelley, born 1797, died 1851. Mistress to the poet Lord Byron and wife to the poet Percy Shelley. She is chiefly remembered as the author of the novel Frankenstein.
Hard copy novel.
Printing a hard copy. The subject matter is artificial intelligence. Miss Shelley wrote the book when she was only 19 years old, while living with Byron and Shelley at the Villa Diodati, presently some 200 yards north-northeast. Be forewarned, Dr. Buchanan. Probability is high that they are late sleepers.
And it has this I guess little mini printer or fax machine or something inside the car that just serves it out on a tray. And I thought, yeah, that could be an option in a Tesla if somebody really wanted it.
I thought the car was funny because I know you know the reference too. It reminded me of Kit from Knight Rider because I don't have Alexa or Siri. I sometimes talk to Google, but that's very simple. So I don't know. But if Siri or Alexa quip with you, but the car quips with him, like they joke with each other.
Yeah.
And I thought that was hilarious.
It was.
She had several lines that I typed out in my notes that I take extensively and never reference. Oh, jeez.
Well, anyway, so yeah, his whole deal, their deal is somehow, I guess the car probably has some kind of futuristic energy generator of electricity. And so he has the monster climb up the tower, dragging these cables up with him and attach it to the roof. So I guess lightning still needs to strike the cables, which are attached to his car. Or is it all a big ruse? I'm not exactly certain.
I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I mean,
I think he needs a charge. Yeah.
I think that maybe the car can, the lightning can strike and then the car can store, I don't know. It really doesn't matter. They all have to be hooked up together. Meanwhile, Buchanan has the prototype for his
laser
ion laser.
thing.
I don't know what it is for his laser in the back of the car. And he's also charging it up and he has it pointed at the tower.
So this is a direct parallel then, isn't it? It's like lightning strikes this beacon, which is going to allow Frankenstein to bring his monster alive. At the same time, it's going to give Buchanan enough power to light his laser up. So they're both doing exactly the same thing, just with different ends. It's kind of clever, isn't it?
It is clever. And then once they get everything strung up there and then they get into Frankenstein's lab, it really feels like those old black and white Frankenstein movies with all of the electricity things and the things bubbling up in
it's good.
Cylindrical tanks and all kinds of crazy lights and the big storm. And I can't say enough how much I like Raul Julia. Not just in this role, but I just think he's fantastic. But I think that he's fantastic in this role. he's charming and charismatic, but I also entirely believe him as insane.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he's manic and crazy and power hungry and egotistical. He plays Frankenstein so well.
I wanted to give man the power to create life, to free him from a cruel and fictitious god. What man ever achieved that?
You know, the Frankenstein in the book is like 19. Like, he's like a first-year med student. Film adaptations should age him up. Like, he needs to have had a lifetime of thinking he's top dog to really, I think, have that kind of insane intensity about him. But
right.
It's great. And basically everything happens just as it does in those movies. Well, except here, it's not Igor helping Frankenstein.
It's his monster.
Now, I don't really recall. They never make the mate in the book. So this is really more like, and I've never seen it, but I think the clips that I've seen, this is like Bride of Frankenstein. The monster is helping Frankenstein make his bride, and that all kind of happens. There's some drama where there's not enough lightning, but then there is. And then she finally wakes up. It's Elizabeth, by the way, who basically looks pretty much the way she always has, except he gave her enormous thumbs. Now, why do you think that is?
I don't know. That was odd.
Did you notice that?
Yeah, it was an odd choice, right? I didn't know if, she also... Did he have clamps on her thumbs, too? I don't know.
I don't know. Like, she looks pretty much the same, except she's kind of stitched a little bit on her face and, like, around her hair. It looks like maybe it's a little burned or whatever. But then when she wakes up here in a second... She has enormous thumbs.
maybe they wanted her to look monstrous, but not ugly her up too much. So they just decided to focus on the hands.
I'm gonna choose not to put too much thought into that and just let it go. But anyway, that happens. They kind of bring her to life, but at the same time, there's enough energy for the laser to go off, and the laser goes off, and it shoots at all of them, I guess. And
it shoots at the whole castle.
Happens.
Yeah.
Something crazy happens, and then all of a sudden, they are in a wintry tundra.
Mm-hmm.
The mansion/castle is kind of in ruins, but they're all there and still alive.
What an interesting notion, right? Because isn't the book the framing story that eventually Frankenstein chases his monster as far as like Antarctica or something like that?
Like to the North Pole, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's, which, I don't know how practical that is, but anyway, that's what happens. And so this nods to that, but in a different way. This is like the future. So I think it's supposed to be, all of this is supposed to be taking place in like the same location, the same physical location. We're just jumping around in time. So in the future, humanity is more or less reduced to this frozen tundra. And in the past, this was the site of Frankenstein's lab. In 2031, this was the site of Buchanan's lab. Whoever knows how far into the future we are. The world is a tundra wasteland, but Buchanan's lab is still there. But we don't know that yet.
Well, to be fair, now, like again, I don't think the movie is concerning itself with this because Buchanan didn't get sucked into the time rip from his lab. He had driven home.
Oh, right.
But
that's true.
But I don't even think they care. I don't even know that his lab and home were necessarily supposed to be in the countryside of Geneva. Who cares? Whatever. He got sucked into Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. And now he's somewhere else.
They're in the ruins of his castle because it kind of broke apart while they're there. But now there's this drama where Elizabeth/Frankenstein's bride wakes up, looks at herself, and starts to walk towards Frankenstein's monster. And they kind of embrace. But then Victor Frankenstein turns to her and says, "Come to me, Elizabeth." And so she has this whole kind of mental realization. It's all on her face. It's all just this bit. What's she going to do? And then what's that going to do? If she goes to Victor Frankenstein, then the monster's going to be pissed. So you're wondering what's going to happen. And in a very, very quick scene, because Frankenstein has his gun out, and he's aiming at the monster. She goes up to Victor and grabs the gun and pulls the trigger herself, forcing him to shoot her in the chest, and now she's dead. So that was tragic, but expected.
Sure.
Yeah.
Again, I've never seen Bride of Frankenstein, so I don't know how that goes.
At that point, there's a little bit of a battle, I think, right, between them. The monster kills Frankenstein, and he trudges off.
Oh, that's right. He kills him. He goes up to him. I liked this. He grabs him and he picks him up by like crotch and shoulders, I think.
Yeah.
And holds him up over his head. And I think, now I don't know because it was a really quick shot, but I think that was a whole dummy of Raul Julia.
Yeah, it must have been.
And like breaks it over his knee. And then Raul Julia lays in the snow and bleeds out of his mouth and dies.
He's dead, yeah.
And then the monster takes off. Yeah.
Now Buchanan is literally Victor Frankenstein in the novel, going through the frozen tundra after the monster to try to kill him before he reaches somebody else and kills more people. He stumbles onto a portal.
It's a hatch, like a hatch from Lost, like down into the underground.
Mm-hmm.
Buchanan finds this, and when he goes down there, it's different. It's not like his lab before, but it's all this technology with like, big panels of computers and like lasers everywhere. And when Buchanan goes down there, an AI voice says, "Welcome, Dr. Buchanan."
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the implication here is. Like,
I think it's his old lab.
And well, maybe it's his old lab, or it's the technology that he
created. Yeah.
Developed. So it recognizes him. Mm. But the monster is also in the room, and the monster says,
"This world you made is better than Victor's. It is barren as I am barren. Lonely as I am alone."
All of a sudden, the monster is like all philosophical and knows all this stuff. And he's like, "This is the brain of the great city beyond, the last refuge of mankind." Oh my God. Like there's
heavy drama.
It's heavy drama.
And the monster just knows all this shit all of a sudden.
And it's all happening with like lasers and like all this crazy stuff is going on. Buchanan like shoots the monster, but he's not dead. And then the monster says, "What am I that you must destroy me?" There's, just as there is in the book, they maintain it in the movie too. It just seems like in the book, whereas it's a big kind of philosophical, moral, spiritual debate, like they touch on it here, but it doesn't really have the same impact. He's like, "What am I that you must destroy me?" And Buchanan's like, "An abomination in the eyes of God." And the monster's like, "So what are you?" And then he says, "I am Frankenstein?"
Yeah, I thought it was a little heavy-handed. I mean, I think he just recognizes that he did the same thing. Like he created this monster. His monster was this laser, and, it ended up destroying the world. It ended up turning against its creator, and now he's responsible for all this pain. And in Frankenstein's case, sort of like the village and all that, and who knows what else the monster's going to do. But in Buchanan's case, it's just the entire world. In his effort to save it, he ended up destroying it. And so I think that's the parallel that they're very strongly painting with a very dark brush here.
Yeah, eventually. I mean, there's more fighting. Like the monster, I think Buchanan shoots him, but then the monster rips off his own arm and tries to beat Buchanan with it.
That was hilarious.
I thought that was hilarious.
He's swinging his own arm around for no good reason. Anyway, that was great. He's trashing the place too. He's pulling things down and whatnot. But Buchanan still has his lasers, and I guess he still knows how they work somehow.
And he uses the clapper to control them.
Yes.
I'm not kidding, guys.
The clapper.
He uses the clapper and some like hand motions to control lasers, and the lasers shoot the monster. Oh, God. And then the monster's like getting electrocuted and stuff, and he's like, "You don't understand. You can't kill me." I don't know, whatever. And then Buchanan he leaves the facility, and he looks at this like big city on the horizon. And then is it the monster like voiceover, like, "You think you've killed me, but I am with you forever. I am unbound." And then it's a long, like a wide, like an aerial shot of Buchanan walking towards this post-apocalyptic, wintry city.
That may or may not have anybody in it. We're not sure.
The end. That's the end.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I thought it was a blast. I enjoyed it.
This is an odd movie to recommend to people, because I think that there are a lot of people who are kind of casual horror fans or maybe more modern horror fans who I would recommend this to, and they would watch it and they'd be like, "What the fuck?" Like,
Right.
why? Why did he recommend this? And then I feel like there are people like you and me, just as you just now introduced this movie to me, I would be so excited to introduce it to somebody like you or me who hasn't seen it. Because I was giddy, top to bottom, front to back, giddy through the whole thing. It's so obviously Corman. It's so obviously his style.
Yeah.
However, it's clearly a much larger budget. There are tons of people that you will recognize in it. The performances are good. The acting is good. I don't have any complaints about the acting. It's larger in scope than any other Corman film I've seen. Most Corman films I've seen are shot on they're shot on sets. It is very small. It is very confined. You usually have 3 or 4 locations if you're lucky. This, that, you know, I don't know how it was done. I don't know if they did it with screens or if they were actually shooting on location. I have no idea, but it looks good. It looks much bigger and broader. I was impressed. I'm used to Corman directing cheesy, goofy films that I often enjoy, but this, he shows a little bit of gravitas.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he shows me in this last film that he directed that he could do those movies like the other guy did. That's just not what he does.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. This movie had an $11.5 million budget in 1990 dollars. I'm not sure what that translates to in 1960 dollars.
It's low.
Yeah.
But I mean, $11 million even in 1990 is low.
And so in a way, this really harkens back to what we did at the start of the series, The House of Usher. You know, here was Corman presented with better actors than he usually has, a bigger budget, puts together something that has a little more spectacle to it, based on a literary property that everybody knows, and allows it to get philosophical and a little heady as the material warrants, and crafts a really fine little film. Unlike, you know, House of Usher, which was very well received and made a ton of money, and then, of course, as we had said earlier, spawned a whole series of those Poe films, this movie just failed at the box office. It didn't even make $500,000. And so, you know, more or less just went straight to video.
Wow.
And it seems like everyone's forgotten about it, which is a shame, really, because I feel like, I mean, here we are reappraising this movie. I feel like people nowadays might reappraise this movie and see something a little more special there.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
I think so, too.
Again, it's cheap and corny in spots. Like the ending, again, the dialogue there is a little corny and what they're trying to say, and I was a little heavy-handed. And we talked about how the sets and things do look a little cheap and a little off the shelf at times. And that's fine. Again, I think it serves the material well, but it was probably more a function of what they had to work with and Corman's efficiency. But the performances are great. The story is interesting. I was never bored. I had a lot of beautiful, pretty things to look at. You know, I like the thematic parallels and sort of being mentally challenged there as well. You know, it wasn't just a pure popcorn movie. I just thought all around it was it was disappointing for him, you know, because it didn't do well financially. But I think Corman could be very proud of this movie as a director.
I loved it. And I'm so glad that you chose it. I mean, I had said, let's do something a little bit more modern. That was my only request, I think, if I remember correctly. And you picked this one. And I was kind of glad because I had looked at it. I was interested. But I'm so glad now that you picked it. I'm so glad to have seen it. I enjoyed it so much. And I know for a fact that a lot of that is because I just taught Frankenstein for the first time last year and I really enjoyed it and my students really enjoyed it. So to be that close to it, and I'll be teaching it again in the fall. And it just makes me even more excited to read the novel again.
Well, what an interesting career Corman has had. And there's so many more films you can go and check out that he either directed or that he had a hand in producing, many of which are fun, some of which, are kind of silly and maybe forgettable. Almost every single movie that he made money, and he was very proud of that. He said he had very, very few. I mean, you could probably count them on one hand, and this, I guess, being one of them. movies that he made where he didn't at least recoup the budget. They were happy if they made money. They didn't need to be up for Academy Awards or anything like that or be this huge box office hit to be satisfied and move on to making the next picture. And that's what I really like about this guy. God, there are times when I feel like I was just a couple decades late to the party. I like this ethos. It really gels with my own ethos. And as an artist, as a creator, getting along in the world, it really would have been fun to be a part of his team at some point in my life. And I'm sad that I'll never have that opportunity. But it's been fun looking back on his career. And we will do so many more Corman movies.
Of course we will.
In the future. I'm actually kind of giddy to do Carnosaur now. Now that we've seen this, I was thinking, man, we should do Carnosaur. And I want to go back and revisit some of those Poe films as well because love Vincent Price. And a couple of those Poe films I remember as just being a lot of fun. Hopefully our listeners will have some suggestions as well for their favorite Corman-produced movies. And who knows, maybe we'll do another series at some point. All right, well, thank you again for listening. Again, give us your responses. We want to hear your feelings and thoughts about Corman. Just write them in the comments wherever you're listening to this podcast, like maybe on Apple Podcasts. Maybe you went directly to our website at chainsawhorror.com. You can leave us comments there as well. We try to respond to everything we receive, even on our Instagram and Twitter pages, X, whatever you call it now, and our Facebook page. Just Google Two Guys and a Chainsaw Podcast, and those will pop right up for you. Also, we have a lot of fun chatting with our patrons behind the scenes. Go to patreon.com/Chainsaw Podcast and think about subscribing there. We love our patrons. We thank them for your support. We thank you for your support. The best thing you can do for us is just to refer this to another friend and get us a new listener. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.